Do you want to understand why Beavercreek property taxes are so high compared to any place else you've ever lived before? I'm Carl Fischer, and I've been serving on your school board for the last 4 years. And in this presentation, I'm going to teach you what is going on behind the scenes that drives property taxes in the state of Ohio. There are four key things I'm going to talk about that'll help you understand where your property taxes go in the Beavercreek City Schools District. First, we're going to start by looking at your personal property taxes. I'm going to show you how to look up your tax bill and get a graph that shows you where your personal taxes are going for your exact house. Personally, most of mine go to Beavercreek City Schools, and I suspect that'll be true for almost everyone, if not everyone here. But you should go see for yourself so you understand exactly what you're paying. Second, we need to understand that Ohio ranks 44th out of 50 in terms of support by the state for K through 12 public education. Third, we need to understand how Fair School Funding Plan in Ohio distributes tax revenue based on need. And finally, you need to understand that Beavercreek has no sales or income tax, and we'll talk about why that matters. Let's start by finding your personal home's tax profile. Because the specifics of where your tax dollar is going depend on where you live, whether you're in the city or the township, or maybe you live in Fairborn. Beavercreek City School District is a portion of your tax bill, and I suspect for most of you it's at least the 54.57% that I have, possibly substantially more if you live in an area that doesn't have city taxes. So to find your tax bill, you're going to visit the Greene County Auditor website. You can find that through Google, or I'll try to add a link underneath this video. You're going to click on the property search button, and you're going to search by your last name and then your first name. Note that there's no comma between your last and first name. It should come up with your property address that you own, and you'll click on levy distribution. And when you do that, you should see a graph that looks like this one. And as I said, I suspect that schools are the majority for everyone watching this video. Now, let's talk for a minute about how school districts are funded in the state of Ohio. On the left-hand side of this graph, I'm showing the sources of funding. So at the bottom, we've got our community. Above that, we've got the state of Ohio. And then, of course, we've got the federal government. And you all know that as members of the community, you are paying taxes to the federal government and taxes to the state of Ohio. And in my view, they ought to be supporting our school districts to some degree. But as you see, the United States government does not provide a significant amount of funding for local schools. That has traditionally been something that has been left to the states to determine how to fund. However, what was surprising to me is how little the state of Ohio contributes. Only $2.7 thousand per student in Beavercreek comes from the state of Ohio. And that leaves the remainder of the cost to educate each student, a whopping $10.9 thousand to come from the community in order to make up the shortfall that we have from the United States and the state of Ohio not substantially supporting local schools. So once the school has that money, let's talk a little bit about where that money goes. I'm proud to say that as an effective and efficient school district, the vast majority of our funding goes to instructing our students. $8.9 thousand per student goes to instruction costs. That's largely salaries and benefits for our employees, and a little bit of it is things like books and classroom equipment and so on. The buildings takes about $1.4 thousand per student. Of course, we need a space to educate our students, and we have to keep the bathrooms working, the roofs covering, etc. One thing that's really neat that won't show up in a lot of the reports you can find is that our food service in Beavercreek actually slightly more than breaks even. Even though we have fantastic prices for meals in our schools, we have a very efficient school food service that manages to actually bring in more than they spend. And that's really a testament to the dedication of our employees. Support goes to teacher support and student support. These are things like laptops, Chromebooks, etc., other sorts of instructional materials and so on. That comes to a total of $1.4 thousand per student. transportation usually gets bundled under support, but it's important enough that I thought we ought to break it out. We have a massive transportation organization in Beavercreek City Schools in order to get all the kids to and from school safely every day. That costs a total of $850 per student per school year, which is, when you stop and think about it, every single day for a year. That's incredibly efficient. And then, of course, administration. That's one of those things you try to keep down, but we need to have top-notch administration to make sure your tax dollars are being wisely and efficiently spent. And so we spend $1,700 per student ensuring that administration works well and that rules are effectively and fairly followed out. An important thing here I'm showing at the bottom that a lot of people forget about is that because the vast majority of our expenses are salaries and benefits, that actually comes back into the community. Whether you are a business owner or whether you work for a local business, a lot of the money that flows through our community is salaries that are coming out of our local schools. Obviously, not all in Beavercreek, but flowing out of our local schools to our local teachers and administrators, flowing back into community services. How does the state of Ohio fund public education? Well, the graph on the right here shows on the x-axis how much the state share is for each of the school districts by state. And I've highlighted Ohio here because what you can see pretty clearly is we are down near the very bottom. There's a couple outliers further to the left that fund schools even less, but only three of them. We are actually the sixth lowest in the country in terms of our support for public K through 12 education. The only states lower than us are Florida, Texas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and New Hampshire. And this is the average across all Ohio school districts. But as we'll see in a minute, Beavercreek actually gets substantially below average even for Ohio's poor support level. Let me start by apologizing for how complex this graph is. I tried to cram a lot of information in here. This shows basically every school district in the state of Ohio that relies on property taxes in order to make up the shortfall between state funding and the actual cost to educate a student. So on the x-axis, again, we've got the state revenue per pupil, and you can see, of course, that Beavercreek is way over at the left-hand side, showing that the state does not contribute much to educate our students here in Beavercreek. The y-axis actually shows the current operating millage that each of these school districts has. And what I found amazing is look how low Beavercreek is. I know it feels like our property taxes are outrageous here in Beavercreek because they are so high compared to most other states I've ever lived in. But actually, Beavercreek property taxes are way below the trend line compared to other school districts in the state of Ohio. We're doing really well, believe it or not. I was surprised by that. And finally, the other thing I wanted to convey to you was academic performance. That's the color coding. So the deeper green each of these spots is, the higher performing the school district is. And so you can see that even though we get very little state support and we're keeping our cost to taxpayers very low, Beavercreek City Schools is among the highest performing school districts in the state of Ohio. And finally, the fourth thing you need to understand to realize why our property taxes feel so high is that everybody is levying property taxes in Beavercreek. So on the previous chart, I was just showing school property taxes. What I didn't show, and what is important to those of you who own homes around here, is that the city, the township, the parks, everybody else is hitting property taxes as well. So it feels high because Beavercreek has no local income tax and has no sales tax, which means everything is going on your home's property tax bill every year. So why should we care? For those of us like myself who are still employed, still many decades away from retirement, I have the income to be able to afford the property taxes, the lower state sales taxes. The recent tax cut I just got this year means that I can afford to pay the property taxes, and it's not a big deal for me. And in fact, I've been here for 15 years. When I purchased my home, high property taxes were part of my calculation. I knew what I was getting into. But just because Beaver Creek has a lot of taxable property value, which puts us at the bottom of the Fair School Funding Plan, this does not mean that all of our residents are wealthy. When we talked about the bond issue with our community, one of the things I heard over and over again from senior citizens who had retired and were living on a fixed income, they explained how the increasing property tax that happens as the state continues to fund a smaller and smaller share of both municipal, county, and also school needs means that their property taxes are increasing and it's making their budget harder and harder to close every month. And these are people who have lived here for generations, have raised families here, have memories here, they have community here, and they want to stay in their homes, stay near their churches, and not have to move, right? But the problem is that this fad of cutting income and sales tax and driving all that cost into local taxes is hurting our senior citizens. And finally, the biggest wild card is just in the last year, we've started to hear about this big anti-property tax movement that's angry about the increasing property taxes. There's even an attempt to pass a constitutional amendment that would eliminate property tax in the state of Ohio and effectively shut down all local government. We would have no way to pay teachers. We would have to switch to something drastic. It would be extremely chaotic. So a lot of these things are causing serious problems that we need to pay attention to as a community. So what can we do to make this better? I call it fair funding for all. We need to start out as a community by telling our legislature that this tax policy is a problem. We start by joining the Vouchers Hurt Ohio lawsuit because it is not okay for the state of Ohio to be wildly underfunding public schools while at the same time giving $1 billion away to unaccountable, unauditable, often underperforming private schools that just aren't held to the same standards as our open and transparent public school system. Next, we need to demand that we raise the Ohio state share of public education to 45%. Let's stop having Ohio be at the bottom of the states with the worst public education system. Our students deserve better. We need to shift the Ohio state share up to 45% so that we can reduce local property taxes to a more livable amount and shift the cost of public education off the backs of our retired seniors and the working poor and back onto wage earners like myself who can afford to pay for it. So join me by going to carlforbeavercreek.org/FFA. And there you can make a contribution to help my campaign get this message out. And that'll do two things. That'll allow me to reach out to our community with educational materials that explain what's going on about local property taxes. And it'll also show my fellow school board members that our community does care about solving this problem and wants a school board that will stand up to Columbus and demand that we make Ohio better. This slide is here to provide you with links to all the sources I used to collect the material for this presentation. It has taken me a long time to pull all this information together and make sense of it all for you. I truly hope you found it useful and will share it with your friends and neighbors. This is information we need to have to make informed decisions about how we fund education here in Ohio and how we can make property taxes more reasonable and more consistent with the other states in our nation. Again, join me at carlforbeavercreek.org/FFA, that's short for Fair Funding for All, to give to my campaign and show our board members that our community cares about public education in Ohio and making our property tax situation better in the future.